The auctioneer's gavel froze mid-air, his weathered face twisted in disbelief as the frail voice from the back row cut through the murmurs like a knife. 87-year-old Margaret O'Sullivan clutched 5 crumpled dollar bills, her arthritic hand trembling as she repeated her bid for the dying police dog that nobody wanted. $5 for Rex, going once, twice. The hammer hadn't even fallen when the gasps erupted. A woman in the front row dropped her purse, coins scattering across concrete. Children pressed their faces against the dusty windows, wide-eyed at the skeletal German shepherd lying motionless in his kennel. The dog's ribs showed through matted fur, one leg bent at an unnatural angle, his once proud eyes now dim with pain and abandonment. Officer Jake Davis turned away, his jaw clenched tight against memories he couldn't face. "Sold to Mrs. O'Sullivan," the auctioneer whispered, though his voice carried the weight of a funeral pronouncement. What madness had driven this elderly widow to spend her last $5 on a broken warrior, and why did the dog's ears suddenly prick up at the sound of her voice? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Margaret Maggie O'Sullivan had awakened that morning to the sound of silence, the kind that fills a house when you're the only heartbeat left echoing through rooms that once knew laughter. At 87, she'd grown accustomed to talking to Harold's photograph on the mantelpiece, but today even his gentle smile seemed to mock her loneliness. The foreclosure notice lay crumpled on her kitchen table, 30 days to vacate the home they'd shared for 43 years. "Harold always said the Lord works in mysterious ways," she whispered to the empty room, her Social Security check barely covering the pills that kept her heart beating and her mind sharp, though lately she'd been forgetting which was which. 2 miles across town, Officer Jake Davis stared at the kennel assignment sheet with hands that hadn't stopped shaking since the bombing 18 months ago. Rex lay in the corner of his concrete cell, once 90 pounds of pure courage and loyalty, now a broken shadow of the dog who'd saved 12 lives in his distinguished career. The department's ultimatum echoed in Jake's mind. "Davis, that dog's a liability now. Medical bills are bleeding us dry, and frankly, so are you." The auction notice had been posted for weeks. Surplus police equipment, decommissioned vehicles, and one retired K-9 unit. Jake knew what retired meant in Rex's case. The vet bills alone had reached $15,000, and Rex's PTSD episodes were getting worse. Last week, he'd cowered under a desk for 6 hours after a car backfired. The department psychiatrist had been blunt. "Some warriors never recover, Jake. Sometimes the kindest thing is letting go." But Jake couldn't forget Rex's eyes during their last patrol together. The moment the improvised explosive device had torn through the warehouse the way Rex had thrown himself between Jake and the blast, absorbing shrapnel that should have killed them both. Rex had saved his life, and Jake had been powerless to save Rex's spirit. Pastor William Thompson adjusted his collar nervously as he watched familiar faces file into the police station's equipment bay. Cedar Falls was the kind of town where everybody knew your business and your heartbreak. He'd buried Harold O'Sullivan 2 years ago, watched Maggie fade a little more each Sunday, and heard the whispers about her daughter Linda wanting to move her to Portland's Sunset Manor. For her own good, Linda always said, though Bill suspected it had more to do with the property values than Maggie's welfare. The morning sun cast long shadows through the auction room windows as townspeople gathered to pick through the remains of public service. Sheriff's deputies checked clipboards while curious neighbors eyed surplus radios and outdated computers. In the corner, Rex's kennel sat apart from the other items, marked with a sign that read, "As is, no returns." Maggie entered through the back door, her worn purse clutching those 5 precious dollars, her grocery money for the week. She'd seen the auction notice in Harold's old police gazette and felt something stir in her chest, something she hadn't felt since the funeral. Purpose, maybe. or just the stubborn Irish determination that had carried her through the Depression, 2 wars, and 43 years of marriage to a man who believed broken things could always be mended. The murmur of voices died to a whisper as auctioneer Bill Hartley stepped up to Rex's kennel. Even from 20 feet away, the smell of antiseptic and old wounds hung in the air like a funeral shroud. Rex didn't lift his head when the kennel door rattled open, just one brown eye tracking the movement with the weariness of a soldier who'd seen too much. "Now, folks, we've got ourselves a situation here," Hartley announced, his usual carnival barker enthusiasm notably absent. "This here's Rex, 6-year-old German Shepherd, served with distinction in our K-9 unit. Due to medical complications and, well, behavioral issues, the department's looking to find him a new home." Jake Davis stood rigid against the back wall, his uniform crisp despite the tremor in his hands. He'd volunteered to handle the paperwork, though everyone knew he couldn't bear to watch. Rex had been his partner, his responsibility, and selling him felt like the final betrayal in a long line of failures that had started with the bombing. "Now I'll be straight with you," Hartley continued, glancing at the vet report clipped to his board. "Rex here's got some challenges. Partial hearing loss, mobility issues in his left rear leg, and what the docs call severe anxiety responses. He's going to need special care, special understanding, and, to be honest, significant medical expenses going forward." Mrs. Helen Patterson, president of the Cedar Falls Garden Club, leaned toward her neighbor with practiced gossip efficiency. "Poor thing should be put out of his misery. It's cruel, really, keeping him alive like this." Pastor Thompson winced at the callousness, but understood the sentiment. In a town where people still remembered when $1 bought a gallon of gas, spending money on a damaged animal seemed almost immoral when so many families were struggling. "Bidding starts at $50, Hartley announced without conviction. Silence stretched like a held breath. Rex's tail didn't wag. His ears remained flat. The proud German Shepherd, who'd once bounded through obstacle courses and detected explosives with scientific precision, now looked like nothing more than an expensive veterinary bill waiting to happen. "Anyone? $50 for a trained police dog?" More silence. Someone coughed. A child whispered to her mother, "Why won't anyone take him, Mama?" $40? Hartley's voice cracked slightly. "30?" Jake's fist clenched against the wall. This was worse than putting Rex down, this public humiliation, this reduction of a hero to unwanted merchandise. He'd seen this same scene play out with old soldiers, men who'd given everything for their country only to find themselves forgotten, discarded, auctioned off by a system that measured worth in profit margins. $25. "Come on, folks, this is a purebred animal with professional training." In the back row, Maggie's arthritic fingers worried the 5 crumpled bills in her worn leather purse, a purse Harold had bought her for their 25th anniversary. She thought about the empty house waiting for her, about Linda's weekly phone calls insisting she face reality about assisted living, about the pills she'd been rationing because Medicare didn't cover everything. But mostly she thought about the way Rex's one visible eye seemed to track her movement, the way his breathing had changed when she'd walked into the room. There was something familiar in that gaze, something that reminded her of Harold during those final months when the cancer had stolen his strength but not his spirit. $15? 10? The crowd shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was witnessing the systematic destruction of dignity. Rex seemed to sense it too, his head dropping lower against the kennel floor. $5, Hartley said finally, his voice barely audible. "Surely someone's got $5 for—" "I do." The voice came from the back, reedy but firm. All heads turned toward Maggie as she rose slowly from her folding chair, her hand trembling as she raised those 5 crumpled bills like a battle flag. "I'll take him." The gasp was audible, sharp intakes of breath rippling through the crowd like wind through wheat. Helen Patterson's mouth fell open. Pastor Thompson's eyes misted over. Jake Davis pushed off from the wall, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "Ma'am," Hartley stammered, "I feel obligated to mention that this animal requires significant medical care, special handling, and—" $5, Maggie repeated, her voice carrying the steel that had gotten her through the Depression and 2 wars. "That's my bid." For the first time since the auction started, Rex lifted his head. His dark eyes found hers across the room, and something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or just the understanding that sometimes salvation comes from the most unlikely sources. "Going once," Hartley whispered. The room held its breath. "Going twice." Jake started forward. Whether to stop the sale or witness it, nobody could tell. "Sold to Mrs. O'Sullivan for $5. The gavel fell like thunder in the sudden silence, and somewhere in that moment 2 broken souls found each other across a room full of doubt. The drive home felt like transporting a ghost. Rex lay motionless in the back of Pastor Thompson's borrowed pickup truck, his breathing so shallow that Maggie kept turning to check if he was still alive. Bill had insisted on driving them. "Maggie, honey, you haven't driven since Harold passed, and this old dog needs steady hands." But she suspected he was more concerned about her than Rex. "You sure about this, Maggie?" Bill asked for the 3rd time as they pulled into her gravel driveway. "Linda's gonna have some strong words when she finds out." Maggie's jaw set in that stubborn line Harold used to call her Irish battlements. "Linda lives in Portland and visits once a month. I live here every day. Rex needs someone who understands what it's like to be written off." The house Harold had built in 1962 sat weathered but proud among overgrown azaleas, its white paint peeling like old skin, but its bones still solid. The porch, where they'd shared 43 years of morning coffee, sagged slightly, but the rockers Harold had made by hand still waited in the shade. Getting Rex inside required patience. Neither of them was sure they possessed. The dog's injured leg made stairs impossible, so Maggie had Bill help her fashion a ramp from the old wooden planks Harold kept in the garage, for projects I'll never finish. Rex approached each step like it might explode, his ears flat, eyes darting to every shadow. "Easy, boy," Maggie whispered, her voice carrying a tone she hadn't used in decades. The same voice that had once calmed panicked recruits and spooked horses. "Nobody's going to hurt you here." Something in her inflection made Rex pause. His head tilted, one ear lifting slightly, as if trying to place a half-remembered song. He took another cautious step, then another, until he was standing in Maggie's living room, nose twitching at scents of lavender sachets and old furniture polish. That first night, Rex refused to eat. Maggie tried everything: canned food, dry kibble, even some leftover chicken from Sunday dinner. He sniffed each offering politely but turned away, settling in the corner farthest from any windows or doors. She understood. After Harold died, she'd lost 15 pounds before Pastor Thompson started bringing casseroles and sitting with her until she ate. "Grief takes your appetite," she told Rex, settling into Harold's old recliner. "Takes everything, really. But we're still here, aren't we? That's got to count for something." The second morning brought the first surprise. Maggie awoke at 0500 hours, a habit from decades of marriage to a man who believed dawn was nature's alarm clock, to find Rex standing at attention by the front door, not begging to go out, not pacing with anxiety, but positioned like a sentry, facing the entrance with military precision. "What is it, boy?" she asked, approaching slowly. Rex's good ear swiveled toward her, but his gaze never left the door. When she peered through the window, she saw nothing but Mrs. Patterson's tabby cat stalking birds in the morning mist. But Rex remained alert, focused, his training clearly intact despite his trauma. When a delivery truck rumbled past 20 minutes later, Rex's body tensed. And he moved, not frantically but with calculated purpose, positioning himself between Maggie and the sound. The movement was so smooth, so professional, that it took her breath away. "You're not just any dog, are you?" she whispered. The real revelation came that afternoon. Maggie was sorting through Harold's things, a task she'd been avoiding for 2 years, when she knocked over a coffee can full of coins. The metallic crash sent Rex into immediate action. In one fluid motion, he spun toward the sound, dropped to a perfect downstay position and froze, every muscle coiled for command. Maggie stared. That wasn't a pet's startled response. That was textbook explosive detection protocol. The position, the stillness, the way his eyes tracked for further instruction while his body remained motionless. She'd seen it 1,000 times during her 8 years training military working dogs at Fort Leonard Wood, back when Margaret O'Sullivan was Sergeant O'Sullivan and young recruits called her the Dog Whisperer. "Heel," she said quietly, using the German command she hadn't spoken in 30 years. "Higher." Rex's entire body responded before his mind caught up. He rose smoothly, moved to her left side, and sat with parade ground precision, his shoulder aligned with her leg, eyes forward, waiting for the next command. The movement was so perfect, so automatic that tears sprang to Maggie's eyes. "Mein Gott," she breathed, using more German. "Du erinnerst dich." "You remember." Rex turned to look at her then, really look at her, and something shifted in his expression. The wariness didn't disappear, but underneath it, Maggie saw recognition dawning, not of her specifically, but of the authority, the competence, the understanding that had been missing from his world since the bombing. "You were trained by someone like me, weren't you?" she asked, switching back to English. Someone who knew what they were doing. Someone who cared. That evening, Rex ate, not much, and only when Maggie commanded "Friss" in the same tone she'd used with hundreds of working dogs over the years. But he ate, and afterward, he didn't retreat to his corner. Instead, he settled on the rug beside Harold's chair, close enough to protect, far enough to retreat if needed. The third day brought visitors. Linda's voice on the phone had been shrill with disbelief. "Mother, have you lost your mind? A police dog? At your age? With your—" She'd stopped herself before saying "condition," but Maggie heard it anyway. Linda was driving down from Portland, bringing her husband Robert and their twin boys, ostensibly for a visit, but really for an intervention. Rex sensed the tension in Maggie's voice during the phone call. When she hung up, he moved closer, his head resting against her knee in a gesture so gentle, so understanding, that she finally broke down and cried, for Harold, for her fading independence, for the beautiful, broken creature who somehow understood that they were both fighting battles no one else could see. "It's going to be a rough few days, boy," she told him, scratching behind his good ear. "But we'll face it together, won't we?" Rex's tail gave one small, decisive wag. His first since the auction. Linda Patterson-Williams arrived on Thursday morning like a force of nature, her silver BMW crunching up the gravel driveway with the precision of an invasion. Through the kitchen window, Maggie watched her daughter emerge in pressed khakis and a silk blouse that probably cost more than Maggie's monthly grocery budget, followed by Robert with his perpetual expression of polite suffering, and the twins, 12-year-old Michael and Matthew, already absorbed in their phones. Rex sensed the tension before the car doors slammed. He moved from his usual position by the kitchen table to station himself between Maggie and the front door. Not aggressively, but with the quiet alertness of a professional bodyguard. His transformation over the past week had been remarkable. The hollow-eyed wreck from the auction was gone, replaced by something approaching his former dignity. "Mother." Linda's voice carried the particular exasperation reserved for elderly parents who refused to accept their children's wisdom. She swept through the door without knocking, stopped short at the sight of Rex, and clutched her purse tighter. My God, it's enormous. And those scars. Robert, look at those scars. Robert, ever the diplomat, extended a cautious hand toward Rex, who sniffed politely but maintained his protective positioning. He seems calm enough. Hello, Mrs. O'Sullivan. How are you managing? I'm managing just fine, Maggie replied, though her hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee. The early-stage dementia made stressful situations worse, fragments of memory slipping away like water through her fingers. Rex has been excellent company. Rex? Linda's voice pitched higher. Mother, you named it. This is worse than I thought. She began her familiar circuit of the living room, cataloging problems with the efficiency of a building inspector. The house needs work, the garden's overgrown, and now you've brought home a damaged animal that probably requires expensive medical care. Michael, the more observant twin, had been watching Rex with the fascination of a boy who'd grown up with goldfish and guinea pigs. He's a police dog, isn't he? Look at how he's watching everyone. Dad, that's not normal dog behavior. He's not normal anything, Linda snapped. He's a liability. Mother, at your age, with your situation, this is completely irresponsible. The word situation hung in the air like a sword. Maggie's hand stilled on her coffee cup. She hadn't told Linda about the foreclosure notice, about the pills she'd been rationing, about the mornings when she couldn't remember if she'd fed Rex or taken her own medication. But Linda had always been perceptive, especially about weaknesses she could exploit. My situation is none of your concern, Maggie said quietly. But Rex caught the tremor in her voice. He moved closer, his shoulder pressing against her leg in a gesture of support that didn't go unnoticed. Look at that, Robert observed. He's protective of her. That's actually quite remarkable for a traumatized animal. Linda whirled on her husband. Don't encourage this madness. Mother, we've been patient, but this is the final straw. You can't live alone anymore. You can't afford this house, and you certainly can't care for a special needs animal. It's time to face reality. Reality? Maggie's voice carried an edge Linda hadn't heard since childhood. Reality is that I've lived in this house for 43 years. Reality is that your father built every cabinet, painted every room, and planted every flower in that garden. Reality is that I'm not dead yet, despite your apparent wishes to the contrary. The twins looked up from their phones, sensing the shift in adult conversation from boring to potentially explosive. Matthew, always the peacekeeper, attempted distraction. How can we pet him? The dog? Absolutely not, Linda said quickly. We don't know what diseases. He's clean, Maggie interrupted. Dr. Matthews examined him thoroughly. Rex is in better health than most dogs his age, despite his injuries. Dr. Matthews? Linda's radar sharpened. You've been to the vet? Mother, how much did that cost? The question hit like a physical blow. The examination, medications, and nutritional supplements had cost $347, money Maggie couldn't afford but couldn't bear not to spend. She'd written the check knowing it meant eating generic cereal for breakfast and lunch for the next 2 weeks. Rex sensed her distress and did something extraordinary. He moved to sit directly in front of her, his back to Linda, creating a physical barrier between them. The gesture was so deliberate, so protective, that even Linda fell silent. He's guarding her, Michael whispered in amazement. Look, he's actually guarding Grandma. Enough, Linda declared. Mother, we're calling Sunset Manor today. They have an opening in their assisted living wing, and frankly, after seeing this, she gestured at Rex. I'm concerned about your judgment. We can't enable this anymore. The word enable struck Maggie like a slap. She rose slowly, her arthritic joints protesting, but her spine straight with Irish pride. Enable what exactly? My desire to live in my own home? My choice to show kindness to a creature that's given more to this country than you'll ever understand? It's a dog, Mother. A broken, expensive dog that you bought with money you don't have. It's a police officer, Maggie said quietly. Rex served with the K-9 unit for 4 years. He's detected explosives, saved lives, protected communities. He's a veteran, Linda, just like your grandfather was, just like your father was. Something in her tone made Rex turn to look at her. Those dark eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human, as if he understood every word. Robert cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps we could discuss this more calmly. Mrs. O'Sullivan, we're concerned about your welfare. The house is quite large for one person, and maintaining a pet requires— I maintained 43 years of marriage, raised 2 children, and worked as a— Maggie stopped abruptly, her hand flying to her mouth. Linda pounced. Worked as what, Mother? You never worked. You were a housewife. The silence stretched like a held breath. Maggie's eyes met Rex's, and something passed between them. A recognition, a shared understanding of secrets and service that others couldn't comprehend. I was a dog trainer, Maggie said finally. During Korea, Sergeant Margaret O'Sullivan, Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, I trained over 300 working dogs for combat and security operations. The revelation hit the room like a grenade. Linda's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Robert's diplomatic expression cracked into genuine surprise. The twins looked between their grandmother and Rex with dawning understanding. That's impossible, Linda stammered. You never mentioned— Dad never said— Your father kept many secrets, Maggie replied. As did I. Rex recognizes my training because I trained dogs just like him, better than him if I'm being honest. I know what he needs, what he's been through, and how to help him heal. As if summoned by her words, Rex demonstrated. Michael had been edging closer, fascinated despite his mother's protests. When he stumbled over the coffee table leg, Rex moved with lightning precision, not to attack, but to position himself as a buffer, preventing the boy from falling while remaining perfectly controlled. Jesus, Robert breathed. That was professional-level response training. Rex is professional-level everything, Maggie said with quiet pride. He's been trained to detect explosives, apprehend suspects, and protect his handler with his life. What he hasn't been trained for is being abandoned by the people who should have cared for him. The accusation hung heavy in the air. Linda's face flushed red. This is manipulation, Mother. You're using guilt to— I'm using truth, Maggie interrupted. Rex and I understand each other because we've both been discarded by systems that no longer value what we've contributed. The difference is, I chose to save him instead of letting him die forgotten and alone. That evening, after Linda had stormed out with promises to discuss options with Robert, Maggie sat on the porch with Rex beside her. The dog's head rested on her lap, and for the first time since Harold's death, she felt truly peaceful. She means well, Maggie told Rex, though she wasn't entirely convinced. She's scared. People do terrible things when they're scared. Rex's tail thumped once against the porch boards. In the distance, thunder rumbled, and Maggie felt him tense, but instead of cowering, he moved closer to her, sharing his strength instead of seeking protection. That's my brave boy, she whispered. We'll get through this together, won't we? The phone rang inside. Linda, no doubt, calling to deliver ultimatums and deadlines. But for the first time in 2 years, Maggie didn't rush to answer. She had something more important to protect now, something that needed her as much as she needed him. Rex looked up at her with eyes that held wisdom and pain and hope in equal measure. In that moment, Maggie knew with absolute certainty that buying him had been the smartest $5 she'd ever spent, even if it might cost her everything else. The call came at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, shattering the pre-dawn silence like gunfire. Maggie jolted awake in Harold's old recliner where she'd been dozing, her heart hammering against her ribs. Beside her, Rex was already on his feet, every muscle coiled with alertness, his dark eyes scanning the room for threats that existed only in the electronic shriek of the telephone. "Mrs. O'Sullivan?" Dr. Matthews' voice carried the careful control of a veterinarian who'd delivered too much bad news. "I'm sorry to call so early, but Rex's blood work came back from the lab in Portland. We need to talk." The words hit her like ice water. She'd brought Rex in the previous week when he'd started stumbling, when his appetite had disappeared again, when the light in his eyes had begun to dim despite all her careful nursing. Dr. Matthews had been gentle but thorough, drawing blood, taking x-rays, speaking in the measured tones that medical professionals used when they suspected the worst. "What is it?" Maggie asked, though part of her already knew. Rex moved closer, pressing his warm bulk against her legs, and she drew strength from his presence. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, Rex has a brain tumor. It's significant. Located in the frontal cortex, likely caused by trauma from the explosion that injured him. The growth is putting pressure on his motor functions, his cognitive abilities. Without immediate surgical intervention." The words faded into background noise as Maggie stared down at Rex, who looked back with those impossibly intelligent eyes. A brain tumor, of course. The stumbling, the confusion, the way he sometimes stared at nothing for minutes at a time, it all made terrible sense. "How long?" she whispered. "Without surgery, 2 weeks, maybe 3. With surgery, there's a chance. But Mrs. O'Sullivan, I have to be honest about the cost. We're looking at $15,000 to $20,000, possibly more if complications arise. And even then, success isn't guaranteed." $20,000. The number ricocheted through her mind like shrapnel. Her Social Security barely covered groceries and medications. The foreclosure notice gave her 3 weeks to vacate. She had exactly $127 in her checking account and the loose change in Harold's old coffee can. "Dr. Matthews," she said carefully, "what would you do if Rex were your dog?" The silence stretched long enough that she wondered if the call had dropped. Finally he spoke. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, Rex is... he's special. In 30 years of veterinary practice, I've never seen a bond like yours. Yesterday, when you stepped out to move your car, he paced the entire time you were gone. When you came back, his whole demeanor changed. That's not normal dog behavior, that's love. Pure, unconditional love." "That's not what I asked." Another pause. "If he were mine, I'd mortgage everything I own to give him a chance. But Mrs. O'Sullivan, you need to understand what we're talking about. Complex neurosurgery, days in intensive care, months of rehabilitation. Even if the surgery succeeds, Rex might not be the same dog afterward." After she hung up, Maggie sat in the darkness with Rex's head in her lap, her fingers working through his thick fur. Outside, Cedar Falls slept peacefully, unaware that in this small house on Maple Street, 2 souls were facing the kind of decision that breaks hearts and defines character. "What do you think, boy?" she whispered. "Harold always said that love means making the hard choices, even when they hurt." Rex's tail gave the faintest wag, and she felt tears she'd been holding back for days finally spill over. $20,000 might as well have been 20 million. But the alternative, watching Rex deteriorate, watching the light fade from his eyes while she stood helplessly by, was unthinkable. By dawn, she'd made her decision. The first call was to Linda, who picked up on the 3rd ring with the sharp alertness of a mother accustomed to middle-of-the-night emergencies. "Mother? What's wrong? Are you hurt?" "Rex needs surgery," Maggie said without preamble. "Brain tumor, $20,000. The silence that followed was deafening. When Linda finally spoke, her voice carried the careful patience reserved for dementia patients and small children. Mother, please tell me you're not seriously considering this. I'm not considering anything. I've decided. With what money? Mother, you're 3 weeks away from losing the house. You can't afford groceries, let alone. I'll find a way. How? Linda's voice climbed an octave. How exactly will you find $20,000? Will you rob a bank? Win the lottery? Mother, this is insanity. Maggie's grip tightened on the phone. I'll sell the house. You can't sell the house. It's in foreclosure. And even if you could, you'd have nowhere to live. Mother, listen to yourself. You're talking about becoming homeless for a dog. For a friend, Maggie corrected quietly. For someone who's given everything and asked for nothing in return. The argument that followed was brutal. Linda's voice rising to near hysteria as she painted pictures of Maggie living in her car, eating cat food, dying alone and forgotten because she'd chosen an animal over her own welfare. Robert took the phone twice, his diplomatic tones trying to find middle ground that didn't exist. The second call was to Pastor Thompson, who listened without interruption as Maggie explained the situation. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Maggie, honey, $20,000 is a lot of money, more than most folks in Cedar Falls see in a year. I know, but that dog, yesterday at the church potluck, I watched him with little Tommy Chen. Boy was having one of his episodes. You know how he gets when his daddy's deployment gets extended, and Rex just walked over and sat beside him. Didn't move until Tommy stopped crying. That's not training, Maggie. That's grace. By noon, word had spread through Cedar Falls with the efficiency of small-town gossip. The response was as divided as Maggie had expected. Mrs. Patterson stopped by with a casserole and a lecture about fiscal responsibility at your age. The Hendersons from down the street left an envelope with $50 and a note. For Rex's surgery. Some things are worth fighting for. Dr. Matthews called back that afternoon with unexpected news. Mrs. O'Sullivan, I've been making some calls. Dr. Sarah Chen at Oregon State's Veterinary College has agreed to perform the surgery at cost if we can cover the anesthesia and post-operative care. That brings it down to about $8,000. Still impossibly high, but no longer completely insurmountable. Maybe. The third call was the hardest. Jake Davis answered on the first ring, his voice thick with something that might have been grief or guilt or both. Mrs. O'Sullivan, how is he? He needs surgery, Jake. Brain tumor. I wanted you to know. The silence stretched so long she thought he'd hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. How much? 8,000. I know it's a lot, but I'll pay for it. Jake, you don't understand. No, ma'am, you don't understand. Rex saved my life, not just in the explosion. Every day we worked together, he saved my life. When I sold him, I betrayed everything he'd given me. Let me do this. Please, let me make it right. The fourth call came an hour later from a number she didn't recognize. Mrs. O'Sullivan, this is Sarah Chen at Oregon State. Officer Davis called me about Rex's surgery. I have to ask, are you the Margaret O'Sullivan who trained working dogs at Fort Leonard Wood? Maggie's breath caught. How did you? Your service record is legendary. I wrote my doctoral thesis on your training methodologies. Mrs. O'Sullivan, it would be an honor to operate on your dog. And there's something else. Channel 7 wants to do a story about Rex. Officer Davis told them about your background, about the bond you formed. They're calling it the $5 miracle. That evening, as Maggie sat on the porch with Rex's head in her lap, she thought about miracles. Not the religious kind that Pastor Thompson preached about, but the small, daily miracles of connection and compassion that somehow added up to something larger than the sum of their parts. Rex looked up at her with eyes that seemed to understand everything. The tumor, the surgery, the risk, the love that had brought them to this moment. His tail wagged once, softly, against the porch boards. "Don't you worry, brave boy," she whispered into the gathering darkness. "We're going to fight this thing together, and win or lose, you'll know you were loved. That's got to count for something." In the distance, thunder rumbled, but Rex didn't flinch. He'd found something stronger than fear. He'd found home. The surgery was scheduled for Thursday morning at Oregon State University's Veterinary Hospital, a gleaming facility that smelled of antiseptic and hope in equal measure. Jake Davis had driven them the 3 hours from Cedar Falls, his hands steady on the wheel despite the tremor that hadn't left him since the bombing. In the back seat, Rex lay with his head on Maggie's lap, breathing slowly, conserving energy for the fight ahead. Dr. Sarah Chen met them at the entrance, a petite woman with steady hands and kind eyes who looked far too young to hold a life in her surgical instruments. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, it's truly an honor. Your work at Fort Leonard Wood revolutionized K-9 training protocols that we still use today." Maggie felt a flush of pride mixed with terror. "That was a long time ago, Dr. Chen. Right now, I'm just a woman who loves her dog." Sometimes that's the most important qualification of all. The pre-operative consultation was brutally honest. "Doctor." Chen spread Rex's brain scans across a light board, pointing to the dark mass that had been slowly stealing his life. "The tumor is larger than we'd hoped, but it's well defined. That's good news. The challenging part is its location. We'll need to work very close to areas that control motor function and memory." Jake leaned forward, his face pale. "What are his chances?" 60% survival rate for the surgery itself. If he survives, there's an 80% chance of significant improvement in symptoms. "But," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "there's a 20% chance he won't wake up the same dog. The Rex you know might be gone." Maggie's hand found Rex's head, her fingers tracing the familiar pattern of his scars. "And if we don't do the surgery?" 2 weeks, maybe less. The pressure on his brain is increasing daily. The decision had already been made, really. It had been made the moment Maggie saw Rex in that kennel, broken and forgotten. It had been made every morning when she woke to find him standing guard at her bedroom door. It had been made in 1,000 small moments of connection that added up to something larger than either of them could be alone. "When can we schedule it?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning." "But Mrs. O'Sullivan, I need you to understand that this will be a long surgery, 6 to 8 hours, and the recovery will be difficult. Rex will need constant monitoring, specialized care, possibly physical therapy. Are you prepared for that?" Maggie looked down at Rex, who gazed back with eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom and pain of his 6 years. "Doctor, I've been preparing for this my whole life." That night they stayed at a modest motel near the university. Rex seemed to understand something momentous was approaching. He ate his dinner slowly, savoring each bite, then positioned himself between Maggie's bed and the door, his eternal guardian stance, even in the face of his own mortality. Jake had taken the room next door, but spent the evening with them, sitting on the cramped motel carpet, telling stories about Rex's service record that Maggie had never heard. "There was this one call," Jake said, his voice soft with memory. "Bomb threat at the elementary school. Rex cleared the entire building in 40 minutes. Every classroom, every closet, every hiding place a scared kid might think was safe. Found the device in the boiler room. Turned out to be fake, just some teenager trying to get out of a math test. But Rex didn't know that. He worked like every child's life depended on him." Rex's tail thumped against the thin carpet, and Maggie realized he remembered. Despite the tumor, despite the confusion that had been clouding his mind, he remembered being important, being needed, being a hero. "He saved 12 lives in that warehouse explosion," Jake continued, his voice thickening. "I keep thinking, if I'd been faster, if I'd seen the tripwire sooner, Maybe he wouldn't have. He stopped, unable to finish. Maybe, Maggie said gently. Or maybe Rex saw it and chose to shield you anyway. That's what partners do. They protect each other, even when it costs them everything. The morning of surgery arrived gray and cold. Oregon's perpetual drizzle painting the world in shades of uncertainty. Dr. Chen met them at 6 a.m., her surgical team already prepared. The anesthesia induction area was stark white, all sterile efficiency and monitors that would track Rex's vital signs through the long hours ahead. "I'll be sending updates every 2 hours," Dr. Chen promised. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, this is when you need to trust us to do our job." Maggie knelt beside the surgical table, her arthritic joints protesting, but she needed to be at Rex's eye level for this goodbye. His dark eyes were already growing heavy from the pre-medication, but they tracked to her face with perfect clarity. "You listen to me, Rex," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "You fight in there, do you hear me? You fight like the warrior you are, and when you wake up, I'll be right here waiting for you." Rex's tail gave one slow wag, and then the anesthesia took him, his eyes closing with the trust of a creature who had placed his life entirely in human hands. The waiting room became a purgatory of plastic chairs and stale coffee. Jake paced like a caged animal, his phone buzzing constantly with calls from fellow officers who'd heard about the surgery. Maggie sat motionless, her hands folded in her lap, drawing on reserves of patients she'd learned in military hospitals during Korea. At 10 a.m., Dr. Chen called with the first update. "We've removed approximately 60% of the tumor. Rex is stable, but we're encountering more bleeding than expected, extending the timeline. At noon, 75% removed. His vitals are strong, but we're working very close to critical areas now." At 2 p.m., nothing. The silence stretched like a held breath. At 2:47 p.m., Jake's phone rang. Not Dr. Chen, Channel 7 News, wanting a statement about the $5 dog's miraculous surgery. Jake declined with words that would have made a sailor blush. At 3:15 p.m., Maggie's hands began to shake. She'd been calm for 70 years through 2 wars, Harold's cancer and Linda's adolescence. But waiting to learn if Rex would survive was testing the limits of her endurance. At 3:33 p.m., Dr. Chen appeared in the waiting room doorway, still in surgical scrubs, her mask pulled down to reveal an expression that Maggie couldn't read. "Mrs. O'Sullivan?" Maggie rose on unsteady legs, Jake's hand supporting her elbow. The world narrowed to Dr. Chen's face, to the words that would either restore her world or shatter it completely. "The surgery is complete. We removed 95% of the tumor, more than we'd hoped for. Rex is alive." The relief hit like a physical blow and Maggie's knees buckled. Jake caught her, his own face streaming with tears he didn't bother to hide. "Can we see him?" Maggie whispered. Dr. Chen's expression grew cautious. "He's alive, but he hasn't woken up yet. Mrs. O'Sullivan, the next 24 hours are critical. We won't know the extent of any neurological damage until he regains consciousness. If he regains consciousness." They followed her through sterile corridors to the intensive care unit, where Rex lay motionless on a padded table, his head swathed in bandages, tubes, and wires monitoring every aspect of his fight for life. The proud German shepherd, who had once bounded through obstacle courses and faced down armed criminals, looked small and fragile under the harsh medical lighting. Maggie approached slowly, her hand hovering over his still form. "Can I touch him?" "Gently. Talk to him. Sometimes familiar voices can help them find their way back." Maggie placed her hand on Rex's chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the strong heartbeat that refused to quit. "I'm here, brave boy," she whispered. I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere. You just rest now. You've done the hard part." But even as she spoke the words of comfort, fear gnawed at her heart. Rex's body had survived the surgery, but the dog she loved, the intelligent, protective, gentle soul who had saved her from a life of empty loneliness, might be gone forever, lost somewhere in the maze of damaged neural pathways that even the most skilled surgeon couldn't completely repair. The monitors beeped steadily, marking time in a sterile room where hope and heartbreak hung in perfect, terrible balance. 48 hours passed like a suspended breath. Rex lay motionless in the intensive care unit, his chest rising and falling with mechanical precision, while machines monitored every heartbeat, every breath, every flicker of brain activity that might signal his return to consciousness. Maggie hadn't left his side, except when the nurses physically escorted her to the bathroom or forced her to drink the lukewarm coffee that Jake brought every 2 hours. On the third morning, Dr. Chen arrived with an expression that made Maggie's stomach clench with dread. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, we need to discuss Rex's condition. The surgery was successful from a technical standpoint. We removed the tumor completely, but he should have woken up by now. His brain scans show activity, but—" She paused, studying the charts with the careful attention of someone delivering devastating news. "There may be more damage than we initially realized." "What kind of damage?" Maggie's voice came out as a whisper. "A memory loss, personality changes, loss of motor function. In some cases, dogs wake up, but they're different. They don't recognize their owners, don't respond to commands, sometimes become aggressive or fearful. Mrs. O'Sullivan, I need you to prepare yourself for the possibility that even if Rex wakes up, he might not be the dog you remember." The words hit like physical blows. Maggie looked down at Rex's still form, his beautiful head wrapped in bandages, tubes snaking from his body, to machines that kept him tethered to life by the thinnest of threads. 3 days ago, he had been her protector, her companion, her salvation. Now, he might wake up as a stranger wearing Rex's face. "How long do we wait?" she asked. "Another day or two, if there's no change by Friday." Dr. Chen didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the antiseptic air. Jake arrived that afternoon with news that should have been encouraging but felt hollow in the face of Rex's condition. Channel 7 ran the story about Rex last night. The response has been incredible, donations pouring in from across the country. People want to help with his recovery costs, want to contribute to a fund for retired police dogs. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, there's enough money to cover not just Rex's surgery, but his care for years to come." Maggie barely heard him. Her attention was focused entirely on Rex's face, searching for any sign of awareness, any flicker of the intelligence that had made him extraordinary. "What good is money if he's gone?" she whispered. That evening, Linda arrived from Portland with reinforcements. Her husband Robert and a woman in a crisp business suit who introduced herself as Patricia Holbrook from Sunset Manor's admissions department. "Mother, enough is enough," Linda announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd reached the end of her patience. "You've spent $8,000 on a dog that might never wake up. You're exhausted, you haven't eaten properly in days, and frankly, this obsession isn't healthy." Patricia Holbrook stepped forward with a practiced smile. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, we have a lovely room available at Sunset Manor. Private bath, meals provided, 24-hour medical care. You wouldn't have to worry about maintaining a house, caring for pets, or managing finances. You could finally relax." Maggie looked at them. Her daughter's determined face, Robert's diplomatic neutrality, the stranger with her clipboard and rehearsed compassion, and felt something cold settle in her chest. "And Rex?" "Mother, be realistic. The dog may never wake up, and if he does, he'll require specialized care that you can't provide. The kindest thing would be to—" "Don't," Maggie's voice cut through Linda's words like a blade. "Don't you dare suggest that. I'm trying to help you face reality." "Reality?" Maggie stood slowly, her arthritic joints protesting, but her spine straight with fury. "Reality is that Rex spent 4 years protecting people who never knew his name. Reality is that he saved lives, detected bombs, and put himself between innocent people and danger every single day. Reality is that when he was broken and discarded, I was the only one who saw his worth. He's a dog, Mother, a sick, expensive dog that you can't afford to keep." "He's a hero," Maggie shot back. "And heroes don't abandon each other." The argument that followed was vicious, Linda's voice rising to near hysteria as she painted pictures of Maggie dying alone in poverty, of Rex being euthanized when she could no longer care for him, of family reputation damaged by this public spectacle. Patricia Holbrook tried to mediate with professional neutrality, while Robert attempted to find compromise where none existed. Through it all, Rex lay motionless, unaware that his fate was being decided by raised voices and financial calculations. The breaking point came when Linda played her final card. "Mother, Dr. Peterson called me yesterday. Your lab results from last month. You have early-stage dementia. You're not competent to make these decisions anymore. If you won't come to Sunset Manor voluntarily, we can petition the court for guardianship." The words fell into the room like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through everyone present. Jake, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, stepped forward with an expression that could have melted steel. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you're talking about a woman who spent 8 years training military-working dogs, who's brought a traumatized police dog back from the brink of despair, and who's shown more courage in the last month than most people show in a lifetime. If that's dementia, the world could use more of it." Linda whirled on him. "And who are you exactly? Some guilty cop trying to ease his conscience by encouraging my mother's delusions?" "I'm the man whose life Rex saved," Jake replied quietly. "And I'm someone who recognizes love when I see it." Before Linda could respond, a soft sound from the hospital bed froze everyone in place. A whisper of movement, barely perceptible, but unmistakable. Rex's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, nobody breathed. Rex lay still, his dark eyes unfocused, scanning the ceiling with the disorientation of someone emerging from a long, dark dream. Then his gaze moved, tracking slowly across the room until it found Maggie's face. The recognition was instant and unmistakable. Rex's tail gave one small, deliberate wag, not the frantic greeting of an ordinary dog, but the measured acknowledgement of a professional returning to duty. "Rex?" Maggie whispered, approaching the bed slowly. "Can you hear me, boy?" Rex's eyes locked onto hers with laser focus. Despite the bandages, despite the tubes and wires, despite 3 days of unconsciousness, the intelligence was still there, dulled perhaps, but undeniably present. Dr. Chen appeared as if summoned by miracle, her professional composure cracking into a grin of pure joy. "This is remarkable. Rex, can you follow my finger?" She moved her index finger in a slow arc, and Rex's eyes tracked the movement perfectly. "What does this mean?" Maggie asked, afraid to hope. "It means he recognizes you. It means his cognitive functions are intact. Mrs. O'Sullivan, this is the best possible outcome we could have hoped for." Over the next hour, as Dr. Chen ran a series of neurological tests, Rex demonstrated that while the surgery had weakened him physically, his mind remained sharp. He responded to basic commands, showed no signs of aggression or fear, and most importantly, never took his eyes off Maggie for more than a few seconds at a time. Linda stood frozen in the corner, her carefully constructed arguments crumbling in the face of Rex's miraculous recovery. Patricia Holbrook quietly excused herself, sensing that her services would not be needed. Robert, ever the diplomat, cleared his throat. "Maggie, I think we owe you an apology. We were so focused on what seemed practical that we missed what was actually happening here." Jake knelt beside Rex's bed, his voice thick with emotion. "Hey, partner. Welcome back." Rex's tail wagged stronger now, and he made a soft sound, not quite a whine, not quite a bark, but unmistakably a greeting, the sound of a warrior acknowledging his battle brother. But it was what happened next that silenced every doubt, every argument, every practical objection that had been raised about Maggie's decision to save Rex. With considerable effort, Rex lifted his head and placed his muzzle against Maggie's hand. The gesture was gentle, deliberate, and profound, a dying soldier's salute to the person who had refused to let him die forgotten. "I told you I'd be here when you woke up," Maggie whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I told you we'd fight this together." Rex's eyes closed briefly, as if savoring the moment, then opened again with an expression that seemed to say, "I never doubted you." In that sterile hospital room, surrounded by the people who had tried to separate them, Maggie and Rex had proven something that couldn't be measured in dollars or calculated in risk assessments. They had proven that love, real, unconditional, transformative love, was indeed worth fighting for. Even Linda couldn't argue with a miracle. 6 months later, Maggie O'Sullivan sat on her front porch watching the morning sun paint Cedar Falls in shades of gold and possibility. Beside her, Rex lay in his favorite spot, close enough to protect, relaxed enough to enjoy the warmth on his healing body. The surgical scar that traced across his skull had faded to a thin silver line, barely visible beneath his thick coat that had grown back fuller and shinier than ever. The house that had once faced foreclosure now stood proud and freshly painted, thanks to the Rex Recovery Fund that had grown far beyond anything Maggie could have imagined. Donations had poured in from across the country. Retired military personnel, police officers, dog lovers, and ordinary people touched by a story that proved love could indeed move mountains, or at least save lives. "Morning, Mrs. O'Sullivan," Tommy Chen called out as he rode his bicycle up the gravel driveway, his school backpack bouncing against his shoulders. At 9 years old, Tommy had become Rex's most devoted human friend, visiting every day after school to practice the basic commands that Dr. Chen had recommended for Rex's cognitive recovery. Rex's tail thumped against the porch boards as Tommy approached, but he remained in his downstay position until Maggie gave the release command. The brain surgery had slowed some of his reflexes, but his training and intelligence remained remarkably intact, a testament to both his original conditioning and the careful rehabilitation that had become the focus of Maggie's life. "How's our hero today?" Tommy asked, scratching behind Rex's good ear. The hearing loss in his left ear was permanent, but Rex had adapted with the resilience that seemed to define his character. "He's had a good morning," Maggie replied, though she didn't mention the slight tremor in Rex's left hind leg that had appeared over the past week. "Doctor." Matthews had assured her it was normal, residual effects from the surgery that might improve with time, or might not. At Rex's age, with his medical history, each day was a gift rather than a guarantee. The screen door creaked open, and Jake Davis emerged, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the relaxed expression of a man who'd found his way back from the edge of despair. The PTSD treatment that had begun during Rex's recovery was working slowly but steadily. Jake had taken a position with Cedar Falls' newly established K9 therapy program, helping other veterans and first responders heal through their connections with specially trained dogs. "Sarah called," Jake announced, settling into Harold's old rocking chair. "Rex's CT scan results came back clean. No signs of tumor regrowth. Dr. Chen says if he makes it to the 1-year mark without complications, his prognosis is excellent." Maggie felt tears prick her eyes, though whether from relief or joy she couldn't say. Rex had defied every expectation, exceeded every hope, and proven that sometimes the most broken souls could heal each other simply by refusing to give up. "Any word from Linda?" Jake asked carefully. The relationship between mother and daughter remained complicated, though it had improved considerably since Rex's recovery. Linda still worried about her mother's independence, but she'd stopped pushing for assisted living and had even contributed to the therapy dog program that now bore Rex's name. "She's coming for Thanksgiving," Maggie replied. "Bringing the boys? Michael wants to write a school report about Rex for his history class, something about heroes in everyday life." Tommy looked up from where he'd been practicing sit-stay commands with Rex. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, is it true that Rex might become a therapy dog himself? My dad says dogs that have been through trauma can help other people with trauma." Maggie glanced at Jake, who nodded encouragingly. They'd been discussing the possibility for weeks. Rex's calm presence and intuitive understanding of human emotion made him a natural candidate for therapy work. The irony wasn't lost on either of them that a dog who'd needed so much healing might now become an instrument of healing for others. "We're considering it," Maggie said carefully, "but only if Rex wants to. He's earned the right to choose his own path." As if summoned by the conversation, Pastor Thompson's car turned into the driveway, followed by Dr. Matthews' familiar pickup truck. Wednesday had become Rex Day in Cedar Falls, an informal gathering of the people who'd supported his recovery and now formed the backbone of the K9 Therapy Initiative. "Margaret!" Pastor Thompson called out as he approached the porch, his face wearing the expression of a man bearing good news. "The City Council approved the proposal." Cedar Falls is officially becoming the first municipality in Oregon to mandate therapy dog programs for all first responders. Dr. Matthews joined them on the porch, his veterinary bag in hand for Rex's weekly checkup. And the university wants to establish a research partnership. Rex's recovery has implications for canine neurosurgery that could help dogs across the country. Rex accepted the attention with the dignity of a dog who'd grown accustomed to being remarkable. His recovery had been featured in veterinary journals, local news programs, and even a documentary that was scheduled to air on the National Geographic Channel. But despite the fame, he remained fundamentally unchanged, protective of Maggie, gentle with children, and possessed of an emotional intelligence that seemed almost supernatural. "How are you feeling about all this attention, Mrs. O'Sullivan?" Dr. Matthews asked as he began his examination of Rex. "I know it's been overwhelming at times." Maggie considered the question while watching Rex patiently endure the poking and prodding that had become routine since his surgery. 6 months ago, she'd been a forgotten widow facing eviction and isolation. Now she was the center of a community effort that had grown far beyond her small house on Maple Street. "Harold used to say that sometimes God puts us exactly where we need to be, even when we can't see the purpose," she replied. "I thought I was saving Rex, but maybe he was saving me. Maybe he was saving all of us." The truth of that statement became apparent as the afternoon unfolded. Jake shared updates about 3 veterans who'd made breakthrough progress through the therapy dog program. Pastor Thompson described plans for expanding the initiative to include nursing homes and schools. Dr. Matthews explained how Rex's case had already led to improved surgical techniques for other dogs. But the most meaningful moment came when Tommy's father, Sergeant First Class David Chen, arrived home early from his National Guard duty and stopped by to thank Maggie personally. "Ma'am, I want you to know what you and Rex have done for my son," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "Tommy's been struggling since my deployment to Afghanistan last year. Nightmares, anxiety, acting out at school. But these visits with Rex, he's like a different kid, more confident, more secure. That dog has given my boy something I couldn't give him. Proof that heroes can get hurt and still be heroes." Rex seemed to understand the weight of the moment. He rose slowly and moved to sit beside Tommy, his large body providing a protective presence that had become as natural as breathing. The boy's hand found Rex's head automatically, and the tension that always lived in his small shoulders visibly relaxed. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, the visitors gradually departed, leaving Maggie and Rex alone on the porch where their journey together had truly begun. The foreclosure notice that had once represented the end of everything now served as a bookmark in Harold's old Bible, a reminder of how quickly despair could transform into hope. "You know what I think, Rex?" Maggie said, her voice soft in the gathering twilight. "I think Harold would be proud of us, not for the surgery or the recovery or all this attention, but for proving that love doesn't have expiration dates, that broken things can still be beautiful, that sometimes the best thing you can do with your last $5 is buy a miracle." Rex's tail wagged slowly, and he moved closer to rest his head on her lap. The gesture had become their evening ritual, a moment of quiet connection that needed no words, no explanations, no justification beyond the simple fact that they had found each other when they both needed finding most. In the distance, the lights of Cedar Falls began to twinkle on, each one representing a life, a family, a story intersecting with countless others in ways both seen and unseen. Maggie thought about all the donations that had made Rex's surgery possible, all the people who'd been inspired by their story to help other animals, all the veterans and first responders who would benefit from therapy dogs in the years to come. It had started with 5 crumpled dollar bills and an old woman's stubborn refusal to let a hero die forgotten. It had become something larger than either of them could have imagined, a testament to the transformative power of unconditional love and the radical act of refusing to give up on each other. "Come on, boy," Maggie said as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Let's go inside. Tomorrow's another day, and we've got more miracles to work." Rex stood carefully, his movements still deliberate but confident, and followed her into the house that love had saved, carrying with him the quiet dignity of a warrior who'd finally found his way home. Sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the smallest acts of courage. Maggie O'Sullivan's story reminds us that it's never too late to choose love over logic, hope over practicality, and connection over convenience. When she spent her last $5 on a broken police dog that everyone else had written off, she wasn't just saving Rex. She was rediscovering her own purpose, proving that our capacity for meaningful impact doesn't diminish with age or circumstances. Their journey together shows us that the things we rescue often rescue us in return, that broken doesn't mean worthless, and that sometimes the most important investments can't be measured in dollars and cents. In a world that often treats both aging humans and aging animals as burdens rather than blessings, Maggie and Rex created a legacy of healing that touched an entire community. Their bond reminds us that love multiplies when we share it, that every act of compassion creates ripples we may never see, and that the heart's capacity for joy grows stronger, not weaker, when we open it to unexpected connections. True happiness isn't found in security or comfort. It's discovered in the courage to love deeply, even when that love requires sacrifice. What unexpected friendship or act of kindness has transformed your life in ways you never imagined? Have you ever been surprised by how much joy came from helping someone or something others had given up on? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how love has multiplied in your own life.